Hey there, movie lovers. Welcome back to Rocky Watches Movies. Today we're diving into the unforgettable 1975 classic, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. This powerful drama, with its unforgettable performances and emotional depth, has become a cornerstone of cinematic history. But while we all remember Jack Nicholson's iconic role and Louise Fletcher's chilling Nurse Ratched, there are so many untold stories and fascinating facts behind the scenes. So let's check ourselves in and discover 20 things you never knew about One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Despite the modest success of the 1963 stage adaptation of Ken Kesey's novel, which starred Kirk Douglas, the Hollywood legend was determined to bring the story to the big screen. He reached out to Czech director Milos Forman about the project, promising to send him a copy of the book for review. Douglas mailed the novel, but the package was seized by Czechoslovakian customs and never reached its destination. Unaware of what had happened, Foreman grew frustrated with Douglas's unfulfilled promise, while Douglas assumed Foreman had been rude for failing to acknowledge receipt of the book. It took a decade to resolve the situation, and the misunderstanding was only cleared up when Kirk's son, actor and producer Michael Douglas, took the reins and contacted Foreman once again. Ken Kesey, author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, based his novel on his time working as a volunteer in a mental health facility in California. He was deeply displeased with how the film strayed from his vision due to the numerous drastic changes. One of his main grievances was the film's focus on McMurphy, whereas the book was told from Chief's perspective. Kesey sued the producers. He demanded 5% of the movie's earnings and $800,000 in punitive damages, ultimately reaching a settlement. He later claimed to have never watched the film in its entirety, having only stumbled upon it once on cable TV before quickly changing the channel when he realized which movie it was. Jack Nicholson and Louise Fletcher were not the original choices for their roles. When Kirk Douglas first set out to bring it to the screen, he intended to play the role of Randall Patrick Murphy himself, just as he did on stage. However, when production finally kicked off a decade later, Douglas was too old for the part. Foreman then considered several actors, including Gene Hackman, Marlon Brando, and his personal favourite Burt Reynolds, before settling on Jack Nicholson. The role of Nurse Ratched, the film's central antagonist, also saw a variety of actresses considered. Anne Bancroft, Colleen Dewhurst, Geraldine Page, and Angela Lansbury were all in the running, before Louise Fletcher ultimately secured the part. Fletcher changed Foreman's perspective on Nurse Ratched. Initially, Foreman saw the character as the personification of evil, which made Fletcher seem an unlikely fit for the role in his eyes. However, as Fletcher continued to press for the part, Foreman's view of Ratchet began to shift. He slowly started to realize that it would be much more powerful if it's not a visible evil, but that she's only an instrument of evil. She doesn't know that she's evil. She, in fact, believes she's helping people. This fresh interpretation of the character ultimately led to Fletcher being officially cast. When producers were pitching the film to studios, 20th Century Fox showed interest, but with a condition. Fox was willing to distribute the film, but only if the filmmakers agreed to rewrite the ending. The studio insisted that McMurphy should survive. The producers wisely recognized this as a non-starter, and the film was ultimately distributed by United Artists. A fishing trip scene almost didn't make it into the film. Initially, Foreman was strongly opposed to including a scene that took place outside the hospital, fearing that a temporary sense of liberation would diminish the dramatic impact of the film's ending. But producer Saul Zentz persuaded Foreman to film the sequence, which became the final scene shot. It was filmed at the Oregon State Mental Hospital in Salem, Oregon, a functioning facility at the time. The director even spent a month living in the hospital to observe the environment before filming, often rolling cameras without anyone's knowledge. The hospital was selected because Superintendent Dr. Dean R. Brooks allowed unlimited access to the facility. However, during production, a crew member accidentally left a second-story window open while relaying cables, which led to a patient wriggling through the bars, falling to the ground and injuring themselves. After the production team decided to use the hospital as its filming location, the producers had the idea of casting the facility's superintendent, Dr. Dean Brooks, as Dr. John Spivey, the doctor responsible for assessing R.P. McMurphy's mental state. Brooks agreed to take on what became a substantial role, though it was the only acting job he would ever undertake. He also played a key part in securing work for many of the hospital's patients as extras and crew members during the production. Mel Lambert, another non-actor, was enlisted to play the harbour master who objects to McMurphy's impromptu fishing trip. Furthermore, Lambert, a respected local businessman with strong ties to the Native American community, introduced the production team to Will Sampson, a 6'5" Muskogee painter who would make his acting debut as the major character Chief Bromden. The actors who portrayed patients actually lived on the psychiatric ward of Oregon State Hospital throughout the production. Actor Vincent Schiavelli said they personalized their sleeping quarters, spent their days on campus getting a sense of what it was to be hospitalized, and interacted with real psychiatric patients. Many scenes were filmed without the actors' knowledge. To enhance the realism, Foreman conducted unscripted group therapy sessions with the cast, where he encouraged them to develop their characters' psychological issues organically. Often he would capture footage of the actors both in and out of character without explicitly informing them that the cameras were rolling. Milos Forman and Jack Nicholson had a major falling out over the film's plot. While the extent of the conflict varies across different accounts, one fact remains consistent in reports from the set. Nicholson refused to speak to Foreman for a significant portion of the production. The source of the tension stemmed from Foreman's suggestion that the hospital inmates should be unruly when McMurphy first arrives. Nicholson disagreed, insisting that the inmates' rebellion should only begin after McMurphy enters their lives and disrupts their routines. Although the version of the story seen in the final film more closely aligns with Nicholson's perspective, suggesting that Foreman ultimately accepted his advice, Nicholson refused to engage with the director from that point on. When it was necessary, the two communicated through cinematographer Bill Butler, who acted as a middleman. Christopher Lloyd's role as a state hospital patient was his first credited screen role, although he had an uncredited bit part 5 years earlier in Airport. Danny DeVito, Lloyd's co-star from the long-running TV series Taxi, also appeared in the film, despite having little prior screen credit. However, DeVito had a previous connection to the story, having played his part in the off-Broadway revival of the play in 1971. Emotionally drained by a grueling shooting schedule that kept him 3,000 miles away from his future wife, Rhea Perlman, DeVito developed the coping mechanism of an imaginary friend with whom he would have nightly conversations. Fearing that his own sanity might be slipping, DeVito sought advice from Dr. Brooks, who reassured him that there was no cause for concern as long as DeVito could still recognize the character as fictional. While Dr. Brooks had no concerns about DeVito, he shared the worries of the rest of the cast and crew regarding the psychological state of Sidney Lassick, who played Charlie Cheswick. Lassick's behavior became increasingly unpredictable and emotionally erratic as he remained in character, with the tension peaking during his observation of the final scene between Nicholson and Sampson. Lassick was so overwhelmed by the scene that he had to be escorted off the set in the midst of a tearful outburst. Angelica Houston makes an uncredited cameo appearance as one of the people standing on the pier when the boat returns from the fishing trip. Houston had a romantic relationship with Jack Nicholson that lasted from 1973 to 1989, and the two appeared in several films together, most notably in her Academy Award-winning performance in Prizzi's Honor. Envious of the camaraderie her male co-stars had built and eager to distance herself from her tyrannical character, Fletcher surprised the cast one evening by tearing off her dress on the crowded ward. Years later, the actress laughed about the moment, recalling, "I'll show them I'm a real woman under here. You know, I think that must have been what I was thinking." During production, Dr. Brooks noticed something was wrong with actor William Redfield, who played Harding. After an examination, Dr. Brooks correctly diagnosed Redfield with leukemia, a condition that would claim his life 18 months later. Not since It Happened One Night in 1934 had a film swept the Oscars, taking home awards for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, and Best Screenplay. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest achieved this remarkable feat, with Nicholson and Fletcher winning the top acting honours. This accomplishment wouldn't be repeated for another 16 years, when The Silence of the Lambs became the next and last film to earn this distinction. In today's pop culture landscape, dominated by big-budget blockbusters like superhero movies and established franchises, it's hard to imagine a time when something like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest could be a major financial hit. But that's exactly what happened upon its release in 1975. Foreman's adaptation was both a critical success, as evidenced by the numerous awards it garnered, and a financial triumph. In fact, it became the second highest grossing film of 1975, just behind Jaws. By the end of its run, it had earned nearly $109 million worldwide. The film enjoyed one of the longest theatrical runs in movie history. While the film was revered worldwide, Swedish audiences developed a particularly strong affection for it. Cuckoo's Nest continued to be a regular feature for Swedish moviegoers until 1987, 11 years after its initial release. And there you have it, folks. You now know a little bit more about One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. If you enjoyed the video, which I presume you did as you got this far, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any future videos coming to Rocky Watches Movies. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.